A genius kneels in chains, a fool sits on the throne, grinning. He does not read, he does not think, he does not even understand the system he rules, but he rules it. And the man who could have built it obeys him. You have seen this before, maybe not in a palace, but in a meeting room, a family, a country. The loudest person gets the spotlight, the boldest lie gets the vote, and the one who hesitates, who thinks too deeply, questions too much, gets ignored, sidelined, or crushed. Why? Why is the world run by people who seem allergic to depth? Why do the wisest voices get silenced while the dumbest get crowned? It's tempting to call it a glitch. But what if it is not? What if this is how the system is supposed to work? What if stupidity is not a disadvantage in power, but an asset? Machiavelli thought so. 500 years ago, he stared into the dark machinery of politics and wrote what he saw. He did not write about how power should work. He wrote about how it actually does, and what he uncovered was terrifying. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you truly are. That one sentence explains why fools rise and geniuses obey. Because power does not reward complexity. It rewards certainty. It does not crave wisdom. It craves obedience. And intelligence, real, painful, philosophical intelligence, is the enemy of both. If you are someone who thinks too much, feels too much, sees too much, you have probably already paid the price. You have been overlooked, talked over, rejected. Not because you were wrong, but because you were too right for a world that fears truth. And here's the darkest part. You might have already started obeying without realizing it, biting your tongue, shrinking your thoughts, dimming your fire, just to fit in, survive, be accepted. That's how it begins. You don't lose the game all at once. You lose it piece by piece, every time you kneel to someone who has not earned it. But what if you could see through the illusion? What if you could understand why power rewards the wrong people, and how intelligence often destroys its own chances of influence? Because once you understand the hidden rules, you won't see the world the same way again, and you won't play the same role either. This is not just a history lesson. This is a warning and a wake-up call. Because if you are still kneeling, this is your moment to rise. The higher you rise, the dumber the air gets. That's not a joke. It's a reality no one talks about, because the people who rise don't want you to notice, and the people who don't are too busy suffocating below. Imagine a pyramid, upside down. At the bottom, wide and grounded, are the thinkers, the builders, the deep feelers. Above them, the smooth talkers, the confident presenters, the simplifiers. And at the narrow top, the point where all visibility lies, sits the fool. Not because he climbed with merit, but because the system lifted him like air lifts ash. We don't live in a meritocracy. We live in a perceptocracy. A world where power flows toward those who seem confident, seem capable, seem like leaders. Because we have been conditioned to value clarity over depth, boldness over nuance, and noise over knowledge. Machiavelli knew this. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you truly are. That one line explains the whole illusion. Power is not built on truth. It's built on performance. And performance favors the shallow, because to be clear, to be confident, to be decisive in a complicated world, you must either be incredibly wise or dangerously unaware. And guess which one is faster, louder, and more contagious? In modern systems, whether corporate, political, or social, depth is punished. If you speak with uncertainty, people think you are weak. If you admit complexity, they think you are confused. If you think too much before acting, they think you are incompetent. So, who rises? The one who says, "I alone can fix this." The one who never hesitates. The one who treats doubt as weakness and questions as disloyalty. And the deeper thinkers, they are told to simplify their message, to act more confident, to be more likable. In other words, be less like themselves. That's the trap. The system teaches you that to rise, you must first betray the very traits that make you wise. So, the genius kneels, and the fool ascends. Not because he's better, but because he's lighter, unburdened by depth, untouched by doubt, unaware of everything he does not know, and does not care to learn. And the world, hungry for certainty, crowns him. There's a cruel irony in how power works. The The very traits that define intelligence, nuance, hesitation, empathy, depth, become fatal flaws in a world that rewards boldness over truth and strategy over soul. Because power, as it's structured today, is not designed for thinkers. It's designed for performers. And the genius, he's too honest to perform. Let's start with Socrates. He questioned everything, refused to give simple answers, and prioritized truth over popularity. He did not flatter the crowd. He challenged them. And what did he get for it? He was sentenced to death. Not for what he did, but for what he represented. A mirror the mob could not bear to look into. Now, contrast that with any populist in history. The ones who rise not by deep truths, but by loud certainties. They tell people exactly what they want to hear. No complexity, no caveats, just slogans and promises. That's what wins elections, not, I don't know, not, it's complicated, but I alone can fix it. Next, Nikola Tesla versus Thomas Edison. Tesla was a visionary. He saw a future no one else could, but he was quiet, awkward, philosophical. He was not interested in fame. He wanted to elevate humanity. Edison, on the other hand, was a master of perception. He was loud, political, ruthless, and while Tesla revolutionized the world, Edison branded it. Guess who became the icon? Tesla died alone, broke, and largely forgotten. Edison became a legend, because history is not written by the deepest thinker. It's written by the best self-promoter. Or consider Cicero versus Julius Caesar. Cicero was the moral voice of Rome, brilliant, ethical, idealistic. He believed in law, in the republic, in justice. Caesar believed in winning. And when the game turned brutal, Cicero's integrity made him predictable. Caesar's ambition made him unstoppable. One was remembered as a tragic hero. The other, as a ruler who rewrote the rules entirely. Here's the pattern. Geniuses fail in power games because they play by rules that no one else respects. They hesitate when others strike. They overthink while others act. They assume good intentions while others exploit every weakness. And worst of all, they project their own depth onto others. They assume others are also thinking, also feeling, also weighing consequences. But they're not. They're calculating optics. They're rehearsing sound bites. They're manipulating appearances. And the genius is playing chess with someone who's flipping the board. That's what makes intelligence a strategic liability. But there's a deeper layer. It's not just about being outmaneuvered. It's about being morally bound. Because most intelligent people aren't just smart. They're sensitive. They care. They want truth to matter. They want to play fair. And that's where they lose. Power isn't fair. It's not interested in your ethics or insight. It's interested in control. So, when an intelligent person rises into a power structure, they become a threat. Not because they'll fail, but because they'll expose the game. They'll question the rules. They'll make others uncomfortable. And that's why they're rejected before they can rise. Or worse, tolerated only as long as they stay quiet. So the genius fails. Not because he's weak, but because he believes that truth, reason, and virtue are enough. They're not. Not in a world where perception is king and dominance is mistaken for leadership. Until the genius learns to see the system clearly, he will keep kneeling before men he should have replaced. The fool does not rise in spite of his stupidity. He rises because of it. He does not doubt. He does not hesitate. He does not reflect. And in a world addicted to confidence, that makes him look powerful. This is not just a cultural trend. It's a cognitive glitch built into human psychology. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less someone knows, the more confident they are in what they think they know. Meanwhile, the truly intelligent, they're haunted by how much they don't know. They question themselves, they double-check, they speak in probabilities, not promises. And guess who the crowd listens to? Not the one who says, there are multiple factors at play, and we must proceed carefully. But the one who shouts, I have the answer, follow me. Because confidence, no matter how unfounded, feels like leadership. And so, the fool rises. He rises in meetings, where the loudest voice drowns out the most valuable insight. He rises in politics, where performance matters more than policy. He rises in companies, where charisma secures investment before competence does. You've seen it. The CEO who sells a vision built on vapor, praised as a visionary. The influencer who offers simplistic life advice, celebrated as a guru. The politician who promises everything to everyone, elected in a landslide. They aren't rewarded for truth. They're rewarded for certainty. Because people don't want to be educated. They want to be reassured. They want a leader who tells them what to think, what to fear, and who to blame. Not someone who makes them uncomfortable with complexity. And the fool? He gives them exactly what they crave. He speaks in absolutes. He radiates false certainty. And he does it with a smile. Meanwhile, the wise man is dismissed as too complicated, too cautious, too weak. But here's the twist. The fool isn't accidentally confident. He's chemically confident. Psychologists have found that narcissists and sociopaths are more likely to rise in corporate and political structures. Why? Because their emotional wiring rewards boldness without fear, manipulation without guilt, confidence without competence. And the crowd, they fall for it, again and again. Elizabeth Holmes built a multi-billion-dollar company on fake science because her voice never trembled. WeWork's Adam Neumann created a cult of personality while burning billions. Populist leaders across the globe speak in extremes, attack nuance, and rise to power, while the reasonable, reflective, thoughtful voices are sidelined. Because the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was built. It rewards volume over value, appearance over ability, and bold lies over complex truths. So, the fool rises, not because he's worthy, but because he plays the only game the system respects, certainty. And in a world terrified of doubt, nothing is more seductive than a confident idiot. The fool does not just rise, he fortifies. Because once incompetence sits on the throne, it does not tolerate wisdom, it fears it. And that fear becomes policy. Machiavelli wrote, "The first sign of a ruler's intelligence is the men he keeps around him." Incompetent rulers, knowingly or not, surround themselves with weaker minds, softer voices, and duller sparks. Not because they want progress, but because they want control. Think about it. What's more dangerous to a fool in power? A sycophant who obeys, or a thinker who questions? The answer is obvious, so the system purges the thinkers. It rewards the obedient. And what was once just a single fool becomes a fortress of stupidity. Silence becomes safety. Anyone who asks, why, gets labeled difficult. Anyone who says, this isn't working, gets labeled disloyal. And anyone who's too competent, too insightful, too different, gets quietly removed. What rises in their place? Yes men. Echo chambers. Blind loyalty masked as team spirit. And it's not just at the top. The effect trickles down. A dumb boss hires a slightly dumber manager, who hires an even dumber assistant. Not because they're all incapable, but because each one learned the unspoken rule, never threaten the throne above you. And so, the chain of mediocrity forms, not by chance, but by design. It's not a hierarchy of skill. It's a pyramid of submission, where every level is built to protect the fragile ego above it. We see it everywhere, in politics, where positions go to loyalists, not leaders. In corporations, where innovation is crushed because it threatens legacy systems. In media, where critical voices are sidelined for fear of controversy. Even in families, social circles, and classrooms, the smartest kid learns to stay quiet because speaking up just makes people uncomfortable. That's how stupidity self-replicates. It doesn't just survive, it spreads. It infects cultures. It normalizes incompetence. It rewards conformity, until eventually the whole system becomes resistant to intelligence, and the few who still think, they're exhausted, burned out, mocked for caring too much in a world that pretends not to notice. That's not dysfunction, that's defense. Because once the fool has power, his greatest threat is someone who actually deserves it. So he builds his walls high, not with stone, but with silence, with mediocrity, with men who are just smart enough to obey, but never smart enough to rebel. And over time, the kingdom forgets what competence even looked like. All that remains is the image of power, hollow, loud, untouchable. That's how stupidity protects itself, not by being right, but by making sure no one else is allowed to be. The fool rises, but not alone. He's lifted by us. We don't just allow stupidity to rule. We invite it. We cheer it on. We call it decisive, strong, relatable. And when it fails, we look for another fool to take its place. Why? Because we're not as rational as we think. The human brain does not crave truth. It craves certainty. And in an uncertain world, certainty is more addictive than heroin. Real experts say, it depends. Let's look at the data. There are many variables. Manipulators say, I alone have the answer. Follow me. And guess which voice feels better to listen to? That's the trick. We're not being fooled. We're choosing to be fooled because the alternative is too uncomfortable. We want clarity, even if it's fake. We want confidence, even if it's empty. We want comfort, even if it costs us truth. It's a psychological shortcut hardwired into our biology. When we're confused, afraid, or overwhelmed, we default to the person who seems most certain. It's called cognitive closure, the brain's urge to resolve ambiguity, no matter the cost. It's not intelligence that determines who we follow. It's emotional safety. So we follow the confident one, the loud one, the one who speaks in absolutes because their certainty feels like protection. Meanwhile, the wise man, who's actually telling us the truth, sounds uncertain, complex, even hesitant. And we interpret that as weakness. Think of the scientist explaining climate change with graphs and ranges, versus the politician shouting, it's all fake. One is honest, the other is simple. And simplicity sells. Or consider the doctor who says, this treatment might work, but it depends on your genetics, versus the guru who says, this herb will heal you instantly. We trust the guru, not because they're right, but because they remove our fear, and fear is what fuels the fool's rise. When life feels complex, we cling to whatever sounds sure. When truth feels heavy, we reach for whatever feels light. When we're drowning in nuance, we beg for someone to say, it's not your fault. Here's the answer. Just follow me. And so we do, over and over again. Not because we believe them, but because we want to. We outsource our thinking, we silence our doubts, and we punish those who remind us how little we know. We don't want the wise man. He reminds us that the world is complicated, that the answers aren't easy, that we'll have to grow. We want the fool. He makes it sound simple. So we hand him the crown. The smarter you are, the more you hesitate. Not because you're weak, but because you see consequences. You feel the weight of every choice. You know that every decision ripples beyond you. That's wisdom. But in power, that's also suicide. Because the game of power doesn't reward integrity. It rewards audacity. And the ones who win are not the ones who ask, is this right? They're the ones who ask, can I get away with it? Machiavelli understood this. He didn't flinch from it. In fact, he wrote the rule book on it. A prince must learn how not to be good. That's not a suggestion. That's a survival tactic. Because when everyone else is lying, cheating, manipulating, and bending the rules, the one who plays fair is easy to destroy. They're predictable. They're bound. They hold themselves back. And in a system where success means winning at all costs, hesitation is death. Look through history. Cicero was brilliant and principled. He believed in the Republic, but while he followed the rules, Caesar broke them and seized the empire. Ethical candidates speak in truth, complexity, and humility. But their opponents lie, simplify, and smear, and the crowd cheers louder. Because in power games, morality isn't armor, it's a leash. And the more intelligent someone is, the more they carry this moral weight. They want to do the right thing. They think before they act. They restrain themselves when others lash out. But that restraint, it's costly. Because their opponents, often less intelligent, certainly less ethical, have no such burden. They cross lines without guilt. They make promises they'll never keep. They manipulate, deceive, dominate. And in a twisted way, that makes them more effective. Because power, in its raw form, doesn't care about virtue. It respects boldness. It fears unpredictability. It rewards the one who plays dirty and wins. That's the brutal paradox. The wise man questions himself. The fool convinces everyone he has no doubts. And in a room full of noise, the one who speaks last is never heard. So what happens? The smart man sits in the shadows, waiting for a fair game that never comes. while the ruthless rise, unburdened, unafraid, and untouched. That's the moral handicap. It doesn't mean intelligence loses because it's weak. It loses because it refuses to become what it despises. And in a world that crowns the bold, not the good, that refusal can cost you everything. Incompetence is not always loud. Sometimes it wears a suit. Sometimes it shakes your hand. Sometimes it sits quietly behind a desk, collecting a paycheck for doing nothing. Because when a fool rises to power, he doesn't just stay there by luck. He stays because the system reshapes itself around him until failure becomes invisible and accountability becomes a myth. That's the rot. And it spreads fast. In systems where results are hard to measure, where feedback is delayed, buried, or twisted, no one knows who's actually doing their job. And that's where the fool thrives. Think of politics. When something goes wrong, who gets blamed? The previous administration, the media, the weather, never the person in charge. Think of corporations. Middle managers who build nothing, fix nothing, lead nothing, yet climb the ladder. Why? Because they know how to look busy. They know how to say the right things in meetings. They know how to nod when the boss speaks and smile when the numbers lie. And if something collapses, there's always someone else to point to, or a rebrand, or a press release. The truth is buried, failure is dressed up, and incompetence, it becomes institutionalized. Here's how it works. Delay replaces decision-making, spin replaces strategy, and tribalism replaces truth. In this world, truth doesn't matter unless your side says it. Loyalty matters more than logic. Optics matter more than outcomes. And that's how tribal identity protects the fool. He doesn't need to be right. He just needs to signal allegiance, to speak the language of the tribe, to create enemies, to distract with outrage and divide with labels. Because when a system becomes tribal, criticism equals betrayal, questions equals disloyalty. And the only way to survive is to submit, conform, or disappear. Add chaos to the mix, economic fear, media noise, constant crisis, and the rot becomes irreversible. No one has time to think. No one has the energy to resist. And so, we adapt to dysfunction and call it normal. That's the final phase of incompetence, when it no longer shocks us, when we stop expecting anything better, when we stop asking questions because we already know the answers will be lies. In this rot, the wise man becomes dangerous, not because he's radical, but because he remembers what competence looked like. And the system can't allow that. So it silences him, or promotes him sideways, or buries him in meaningless work until he either obeys or quits. Because once incompetence takes root, it does everything in its power to kill whatever still works. That's not an accident, that's not failure, that's design. There comes a moment, quiet, cold, and unannounced, when the intelligent man wakes up and realizes he's been playing by rules designed to break him. He was not stupid. He was not lazy. He just believed the lie. That competence would be rewarded. That depth would be recognized. That truth would eventually win. But now, he sees it. The meetings, the promotions, the politics, all a performance, all a cage, and he's been bowing in it for years. This is the moment most people bury. They feel it rising, clawing at the back of their minds. But they push it down, because it's easier to adapt than to rebel, easier to shrink than to stand up, easier to kneel and survive than rise and be seen. So they adjust. They become just useful enough to be kept, and just silent enough to never be a threat. And the system loves them for it. But a few, a rare few, they refuse. They stop pretending. They stop nodding. They stop playing the game that's rigged against them. They walk away from the titles, from the fake praise, from the hollow respect of hollow men. Not because they've given up, but because they've woken up. They realize they were never meant to fit in. They were meant to see through, to break patterns, not serve them, to ask forbidden questions, to think in dangerous ways, to live as a threat to systems built on illusion. And once they see that clearly, they can never go back. This is your moment, not later, not someday. Now, to recognize what you've been kneeling to ask yourself why you've silenced your voice, To admit that your intelligence was never the problem. Your obedience was. You don't need permission to doubt. You don't need approval to walk away. You don't need to keep sacrificing yourself on the altar of false kings. You are not here to obey. You are here to see, to understand, and when necessary, to burn the script you were handed, because nothing changes until the smart stop kneeling. And the moment you realize that, you're not a servant anymore. Let's make one thing clear. Intelligence won't save you, not on its own. You can be the smartest person in the room and still be outplayed by someone with half your brain and none of your conscience. Because power is not given to the most thoughtful. It's taken by the most willing to act, to assert, to bend reality until others believe it. And if you refuse to learn that, you will spend your life obeying people who should be learning from you. So, what's the answer? Not to kneel, but also not to mock. Cynicism won't save you either. Calling the system stupid from the sidelines only feeds it. Because while you complain, someone else is rising. You have to learn the game, not just criticize it. You have to understand the rules, so you know when to follow and when to break them. You have to stop expecting fairness and start building strategy. Because the real war is not just between intelligence and stupidity. It's between awareness and illusion. Between those who see how power works and those who pretend not to. If you want a world where the wise rule, you have to stop worshiping crowns. Stop mistaking loud for strong. Stop rewarding certainty over truth. Stop kneeling to fools and thrones they never earned. Your intelligence is not a curse, but it becomes one when it's passive, when it hides, when it waits for permission. So, don't just be smart, be sharp, be strategic, be dangerous. Because the world does not need more thinkers who whisper. It needs thinkers who can walk into power, eyes open, hands steady, soul intact. That's dark empowerment. Not becoming what you hate, but becoming immune to it. So the next time you see a fool in power, don't ask, how did this happen? Ask instead, why did we let it? And more importantly, what are you going to do now that you know?